tech debt. Don't make me laugh. The real issue that maybe you're unaware of is organizational debt. And that's something that for so many startups, as they grow and as they mature, you sort of grow to expect them to get less innovative, to get more cumbersome, slower. But that is not a law of nature. You have the possibility to create an organization that doesn't get that slow as it grows and maybe even gets faster. Amazing, right? The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that tech debt is easy to tackle compared to org debt, and so many leaders are just unaware of it. In this video, I'll go over the most common org smells, like code smells, that I see in organizations and startups to help ensure that you're set up for success. By the way, if you're new here, hi, I'm Ben-Yosef. I'm a tech executive consultant and coach, and I help people just like you create teams worth leading because life is too short to lead mediocre teams. And all of the lessons today are from my work with so many startups and seeing these things go repeatedly. From smaller startups that tend to mature too fast, all the way up to unicorns. And I think that you'll get something out of this no matter your background. Let's start with the first org smell, and that is bending orgs. When you see an org chart and you notice that there are all sorts of patches there, when you see that there is an issue, maybe this person for some reason reports directly to the CTO. Maybe there's a team that's above the rest of the teams, which are in groups or whatever you want to call them, and then they are like floating somewhere. Why is that? Why do we have that specific role be on the outside of the rest of the organization? Why do we have some engineers not under the VP of engineering in general? You see all sorts of things. And my point is, sometimes, yeah, it just might be something that makes sense. However, usually when we're talking about our processes, when we're talking about our org charts, when we're talking about that aspect of your company, I don't want you to be too creative. I don't want you to be innovative. I want you to be boring, because usually that's not your differentiator. So when you have these, what it means oftentimes is that you're bending over backwards. You're contorting your organization just to fit the whims of a few people. For example, I'm guessing you've seen this so many times in the past. There's the tiny group of the first engineers in the startup who didn't want to become managers, leaders, whatever, yet they want to retain their close connection with the CTO, which by itself is fine, but they translate that close connection into, I have to always report directly to the co-founder. I'm sorry, but there comes a point where that no longer makes sense for anyone. And if you allow that to continue, you're just telling people, yeah, I know that's not the right thing to do, but these people are special. How would you feel if you were one of the rest of the ICs in the company? And why are you allowing your precious time to be wasted just to appease someone for something that really doesn't make any sense? Stop contorting the organization just to appease someone. Instead, decide, think for a second, how your organization ought to look. Talk about that with the team, explain this is what we're going towards, and yeah, you can have these changes be gradual. You don't have to do everything, right now. You finish watching this video, you send a Slack message to everyone, hey, right now, bye, you're no longer reporting to me, you're gone. No, but you can say, I think that this is what makes sense for our organization's health and its growth. We're going to move towards this in the next quarter. As easy as that. Easier said than done, I know, but still easy. Next, there's title inflation. And I know that it's so hard to find good people nowadays, and a lot of the times you feel like, yeah, what do I care about giving that guy a title? I can just give him that. I can just tell her that she's the head of whatever, or the lead of iOS, or something like that. And that makes people feel good about themselves. And without having to pay anything, I'm gonna get that person to join my company. However, there are titles and then there are titles. The problem with these titles, especially if you're just handing these out just to make people feel good, is that first of all, when there's this title inflation, everyone that didn't get a fancy title is gonna be thinking, hey, what about me? But even more so, the problem with titles is that they create work. I remember when I used to have the Java lead, Java, when I had the Java lead title in an organization, I used to try and come up with things to fill that position. You know why? Because I care about what I do. I was given a responsibility and I wanted to actually act out on it. Even when, now in hindsight, I can understand that a lot of the initiatives we went into didn't make sense business-wise, because it's nice to have this hackathon about that Java thing, update that thing, whatever. We had more pressing things, and those things, the Java-minded, directed work, didn't really translate into impact that closely. When you give someone the title of an Android lead, they're going to try and create more Android work even when that no longer fits with the company's current roadmap. You have someone that's colored in the budget, in the org, as they're doing Android, they're going to be getting Android tasks, and shifting that is going to be hard. So I always say that we have to try and avoid creating these titles unless they make a lot of sense. I would prefer giving people experience-based titles as opposed to having this zero-sum game of giving each person a different share of land. So it's not backend, iOS, Android, but he is senior, she's a staff, there's a principal engineer, that sort of stuff, so that we don't just have the zero-sum game happening where people get things, no one else can get that same title, because I'm guessing there's only one Android lead. And also, we don't want to have this situation where when you're looking from the outside, you feel like this is a race. If I don't plant my flag anywhere, I'm not going to be left with anything. Those create organizations that are too biased towards those titles and the fake responsibilities they provide as opposed to impact. Continuing on our list of org smells, the next is when organizations have this stasis, things that are too stable. And it takes different shapes and forms. For example, you see those companies that say, we never had to fire anyone, or in 4 years, no one quit our company, or people have been here for, on average, 5 years, whatever it is. These are not necessarily bad, but I will say that for me, these are sorts of yellow flags, because how likely is it that you never made a mistake hiring someone, that no one who joined your team never realized that they no longer like this, or the organization has changed and what they care about is no longer what the organization needs, whatever it is. When you have this, it often means that we're not giving people enough feedback, that we're not cutting the underperformers or the people who don't fit, or maybe you're way too cautious when it comes to your hiring so that you only bring in those people who you're certain are an exact match, meaning you're probably missing out on a bunch of people just because you're that afraid. There are many different ways that we enter the stasis, and what's critical is to ensure that that doesn't become your vanity metric. It's okay for people to leave. It's okay for you to say, we made a mistake. It's okay to ask someone to move. And even more so, I actually encourage my clients to say to their people that this company, this role should be a career highlight, but not the end of their careers. No one expects them to remain there indefinitely, especially if it no longer matches what they want to do and what they care about. As long as we're aligned, amazing, but I don't want people to stay there as if by default. Every month they need to be remaking the decision to stay, and you need to be remaking the decision to have them here. Even more so, I encourage my clients to have internal mobility. So if you have people staying for longer, if you have low turnover because you're that awesome of an organization, that's amazing. But when you have a person stay in the same team for 3-4 years, you get so many things that just become dependent on that person always being there, and that is not an axiom. It's something that will change eventually. And I think that it's very healthy for teams have people have these tenures and they move within the organization every 18, 24 months. So we have this also sharing of knowledge across the organization, and we don't have any person becoming so stuck that the team is essentially them. Everyone knows that if we have an issue, we have to talk to Dave. And on we continue to one of my pet peeves, managerial overload. I actually had a recent podcast episode about, literally, I'm not making this up, a startup where I checked and every single person in engineering had a leadership role. So there was no one who's just plainly NIC. You had the CTO and the VP and the head of and the engineering manager, or two even, and they under them had like 3 leaders of something or architects. And I'm like, okay, who's actually, doing the typing? Are you all just orchestrating ChatGPT all day long? What's happening there? And this might be an extreme case, I agree, but I do regularly see companies that have a managerial overhead that, if you look at it, you would very easily say we can probably cut the amount of managers you have in your organization by 30%, even 50%, and everything would be fine. As I say in my books, we want to have, by average, teams that are of 6 people, so that you will bring in a director once you have 6 teams of around 6 people. And yet I regularly see startups that have about that amount of people in them, and they have several groups because they're all in nano teams, those teams that comprise a manager and 1, 2, 3 people in them. Those teams make no sense. You have so much communication overhead. You have to invest in the growth of those managers because you are investing in the growth of your managers, right? So you have to work that much harder to support the structure. And unless you're in hypergrowth and you know that in 2 months those teams would become full-blown teams, then you're just doing premature optimization and paying a high cost for all of this overhead that usually never becomes a positive investment. And it just also makes it so much harder to change things, because once you've prematurely created that team is there. And then you have this org when you have a team that's doing something and it is unrelated to what the company actually cares about. That brings me to our next code smell, when we have a misalignment between the org and the goals. When I ask a co-founder, hey, what are your top 3 things for this year? And they just shoot at me, we have this, that, and that thing, because they're really on top of things. I say, amazing. Now show me the org. Can we see the connection? And I have a video about this that you can probably see somewhere here on the screen. When I see that we have these squads that don't correlate to what the company wants to achieve, because we had this premature optimization of creating teams, and then it's hard to close a team when it no longer makes sense because we care about people, because we don't want to demote a manager, blah, blah, blah. When we put ourselves in that position, now it's a lot harder to ensure that the organization is in alignment with what the company needs. This is how, with time, we get all of this extra craft in organizations that creates an organization that moves way too slowly. That's how startups really get slower. It's not just the tech debt. This brings me to the next code smell, silos, which are not always easy to sniff out, because you might have silos internally in your organization or externally. Internally, if you notice that 2 teams have worked on similar things and didn't collaborate and did ensure that they don't end up creating essentially the same microservice twice, you know you have an issue. But also, when you realize that there's an us versus them mentality in your organization, you want to talk to product only via processes, only via Linear and Jira, whatever it is. When you have that sort of mentality, I know that the organization is looking at things in a wrong way. Instead of being embedded in the business, instead of seeing itself as a collaborator, as a peer of the rest of the organization, we try and take on the role of contractors. Just tell me exactly what I ought to do and I will do that. No one goes and chats with others to understand maybe we're missing something. When you have these silos, you very quickly realize that your organization can become so much better if only we had known. The issue is the if only here is up to you. You can create an organization that treats others as peers. So don't allow communication to only be defined in Slack or in Confluence or whatever. Ensure that your people regularly talk. Have collaborative sessions like retrospectives and design meetings and brainstorms from time to time so people learn to work together and spot where they have issues. I have a guide about meta retrospectives or impact retrospectives, which is how you work together with product, for example, to ensure that we have no silos and people are really connected. The link will be in the description of this video. But whatever it is, ensure that you're not creating silos, because that is never how to ensure your organization just gets faster with time, but how you get an organization that just gets lamer with time. And the last org smell of the day is leadership imbalance. When you notice that, for example, all of the leaders, the managers in the organization are from within the company, you're just promoting people, which by itself sounds good, right? However, if that's your sole way of getting leaders, it just might mean that you're breathing your own exhaust. You get an echo chamber because you don't get any leaders from the outside. And contrast that with another smell, which is when you're only bringing leaders from the outside. You're never promoting someone from within. It means that your ACs are going to see that and get annoyed or just decide to leave. And also that you're not really investing in people to make them grow into management positions. You're just trying to get someone already there from the outside. You need a healthy balance here, something that makes sense for the health of your organization in the long term. When we have this imbalance, we also regularly see companies that, for example, have a specific subset of the company that tends to go forward. For example, if you have this clique of people who are from the same mafia, who all worked in the same startup previously, and you just find it easier to promote them because you already have some history with them. Yes, when you know people, you have a lot more certainty, and that helps. However, if there comes a point where that becomes your default because you have this bias, you or someone else in your organization, that's wrong. You're going to create this imbalance, other people are going to see it, and you're going to get this organization that's too tilted in a specific direction, in a specific culture that's not your entire organization or doesn't have the entire organization in mind. These org smells are things that I've seen all over the place, and I find it very rare to see a startup that doesn't have at least one of these. So my question for you, which one of these are you suffering from? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely would like to know. And if you like this video, do check out my newsletter. It's the best newsletter online for tech executives, where I share a video every week, my podcast, an article, and some exclusive insights. Link will be in the description of this video. Thank you for joining me.